In this tutorial, we'll take a look at tools from the toolbar that we'll be using, the main ones being the crop tool, the dodge tool, and the burn tool. Go ahead and open the image of Turkish the turkey walker for the first part of this, which will be the crop tool. It's rare that you'll take an image that doesn't require any sort of cropping. And cropping is ethically one of the things that we can do as a journalist to remove unwanted portions of an image. The crop tool is located on the left side of the Photoshop window, and it looks like two intersecting box edges. Clicking on that will bring up the options that we can use for the crop tool in the option bar across the top of the window. By default, it's set to ratio. There are no dimensions put in here. We have these options for clear, straighten. There's an option here that lets us set the kind of overlay we want. This gear also has some additional crop options we can look at. So we can show the cropped area, we can auto center the preview, we can enable the crop shield, which gives that dark edge around the outer side. The crop tool also has some presets. Click on the triangle next to the crop tool icon in the toolbar to bring up the presets. There are presets for a 4x6 inch crop at 300 ppi all the way down to 8x10. This little gear icon here will allow you to create new tool presets based on what you put in across the top of the toolbar, and you can save them for later. To close the crop tool preset window, click on the triangle next to its icon. Let's start by selecting an overlay for the crop tool. Click the overlay option. I personally prefer the rule of thirds, but let's take a look at the grid option as well. With the crop tool selected still, if I click into the middle of the image, this grid overlay will come up. This helps me to see if my image is straight and if my horizon lines are horizontal or not. Now, I personally like the rule of thirds, which splits the image into thirds so that I can see how my composition is working. Come over to the left to grab the handle, click and hold, and drag until the fire hydrant is gone. Once I line that up with the very edge of the fire hydrant, I can double click in the middle to apply that crop. If I want to keep proportions the same on the image, I use the corner of the crop tool to adjust the crop, and I hold the shift key down. Click on the corner, and as you see, as I scale in with the crop tool, it keeps the original dimensions of the image. I can double click, or I can hit the enter key to apply this crop. This image was shot with a wide-angle lens, so there's some natural distortion in the building behind the subject. If I want to use the straighten tool, I can select it from the tool options bar up here. And then I need to zoom in and find a point that I think should be either a straight horizontal or straight vertical line. I'm going to use this window frame as a vertical line as a point of reference. I'll zoom in using the command and plus keys. I'm going to hold down the space bar to activate the hand and give myself a clear view of this vertical line. I'm going to select one point on what I think should be a vertical line, click and drag the line down to another point on that line that I think should be vertical. When I let go, the image will straighten out, and if I zoom out using the command and minus keys, I can see that it's adjusted the rotation of my image. Now again, this image had some natural distortion in it from the wide-angle lens, so it's not straight. But in an image shot with straight horizontal or straight vertical lines that are askew, you can use that tool to straighten your image. You can also use the crop tool to adjust the rotation of your image manually. When you go to any one of the corners, move out from that edge until you see the cursor turn into two curved arrows. Once that cursor appears, you can click and hold, and if you drag up, it'll rotate your image counterclockwise, and if you click and drag down, it'll rotate your image clockwise. Next, we'll take a look at dodging and burning. For this, open the image from the Redwood Logging Conference. Even after you make adjustments in the Camera Raw processor, and then use levels and curves to further refine the adjustments to your image, you may still have some areas that are too dark or too light within that image. Now the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop, their icons actually look like the tools they represented in the darkroom. And it's slightly important to know that because it helps you to determine which tool you need to use. Go over to the toolbar and select on the dodge tool. It looks similar to a magnifying glass, but instead of a lens, there is a solid circle. I'm going to click and hold this so that you can see what these two tools are and what they represent. In the darkroom, a dodge tool was used to keep light from an enlarger from hitting an area on the paper, thus making that area lighter. If you want to lighten a specific part of your image without making adjustments to the overall image, you'll use the dodge tool and set a brush size that will accommodate that. Conversely, the burn tool looks like a hand making a circle. In the darkroom, we would use our hands with a circle in it to allow just a small amount of light to hit a particular area that needed to be darkened. That's why those two tools look like that. Now we can click on the Dodge tool from the toolbar to activate it, or we can use the keyboard shortcut Shift and O. Now the thing about that is that there's also a tool called the sponge tool in there. So when you're rotating through them using the keyboard shortcut, you'll need to make sure by looking in the tool option menu which one you have selected. The tool options for the dodge and burn tools are identical. Next to the tool itself, we have an option for brush size. It's important to know that when you use this tool, you want to use what's called a soft edge brush. So this solid brush here represents a solid brush, and this brush represents a soft edge brush. You can see its hardness is set to 0. The reason for that is it'll help to blend the areas on the edge of where that brush is affecting the image so that you don't have very hard lines between where you dodged and where the original image was. The next thing to notice is the range. Now we've talked about this in levels and curves. We have midtones, we have highlights, and we have shadows. Obviously we use shadows for the dark, midtones for anything in the middle, and highlights for the lighter areas of our image. The most important thing is the exposure. Setting this exposure higher than 10 to 15% can give you some very drastic effects, and it can also increase pixelization when you're dodging. There's a few other options, but we don't really need to pay attention to those other than protect tones. One is an airbrush tool. When you click this option, every time you dodge, it will add exponentially to it instead of just each pass affecting it as you apply the pressure. The tool at the end here, this one is for people that have pressure-sensitive pen tablets. If you use that option, if you do have a tablet, it'll allow you to dodge more by pressing harder or burn more by pressing harder on the tablet. With the mouse, you only have one option for pressure. You want to keep that exposure between 10 and 15% for your midtones, and then 10% and under for your shadows and highlights, so that each time you apply the tool, you don't make very drastic changes. Less is more when you're dodging and burning. Once we've decided whether we're going to dodge in a highlight, shadow, or midtone area, we need to set a brush for the area we want to dodge. In this case, I want to dodge the face underneath the hat. So I want to set a brush that's almost as big as the area I'm working with. We can increase or decrease the brush size by using the left bracket to make it smaller, or the right bracket key to make it larger. In this case, I want it a little smaller because I need to be able to work in this area. I want to make sure, since I want to dodge, that in the upper left hand side I see the dodge tool and not the burn tool. I'm going to start by making a semicircle around the face area. I'm going to click and hold that tool, and when I get to the end of the circle, I'm going to let go. Now I'm going to do that repeatedly until I get to a point where I feel I've gotten enough detail out of the shadow area. One pass at a time, and this is where the history tool comes in handy. If I think I've gone a little too far, if I open the history tool in the upper right hand corner here, I can go back step by step and see the changes that I've made. I think we've done pretty good for his cheek, but we might need to add a little in his eye. So I'll make a few little passes like that until it looks even. I may also want to dodge this area down here where his arm is. For this, I want to go ahead and actually switch it to shadows because it's pretty dark. And I'm going to actually switch this exposure to 5%. I don't want my effect to be too much. I'm going to use the right bracket key to make my brush bigger. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a dodge to this area where the tool is so I can see a little bit more detail in there. Now we'll take a look at the burn tool. I can select it from the menu on the side by clicking and then scrolling down to it, or I can simply switch by going Shift-O and turning to the burn tool. That's going to reset my brush size to the last time I used this tool. I'm going to use Command and minus to zoom out on this image a little bit so I can look at the edges. I think this upper left corner could use a little burning. I've got a little bit of light sky and this pipe's a little bit bright. I'm going to use the right bracket key to increase my brush size, and I'm just going to do a few passes here. Make sure I have highlight selected, that my exposure is at about 5%, and I'm just going to do one pass at a time. and darken this down a little bit more so that it's not so bright and it doesn't distract me. And that's the dodge and the burn tools.